August 23, 1973, Norrmalmstorg Square, Stockholm, Sweden. Christine Inmark, a 23-year-old bank clerk, was doing her job at Sveriges Kreditbanken, one of Stockholm's largest banks. It was a routine summer morning, and the bank was buzzing with the activity of clients and employees handling their daily transactions. Christine sat at her desk, helping a customer, when the sound of the front door opening echoed through the hall. A man walked in. He seemed composed, wearing sunglasses and a wig that disguised his appearance. As he moved closer to the center of the bank, he suddenly drew a submachine gun from his jacket and yelled, "The party's just begun," in a thick English accent. The question is, what made this ordinary bank heist turn into a bizarre hostage crisis? And why, after 6 long days of captivity, would the hostages defend their captors and refuse to testify against them? This is one of the most action-packed and intense bank heists because both the robbers and the authorities used smart and creative tactics to get what they wanted. After more than 50 years, this is one of the most studied bank heists in history because it led to the birth of one of the most fascinating psychological phenomenon known as the Stockholm Syndrome. The man was Jan Erik Olsson, a convict who had recently been let out on parole. As chaos erupted, Olsson fired his submachine gun into the ceiling, sending customers and staff into panic mode. However, he did not take the bank customers as hostages. Instead, he allowed them to leave the bank shortly after he initiated the robbery. While Olsson was busy with the situation at hand, Christine pushed the silent alarm button, and just a few moments later, a police officer that was close by responded to the alarm and entered the building to investigate. To his surprise, the robber saw him first and shot him in the hand, which made the police officer retreat very quickly. Olsson kept 3 hostages only, including Christine Inmark, Brigitta Landblad, and Elizabeth Oldgren. A few minutes later, the scene was filled with police cars and a large crowd of people scattered all around the bank. Policemen stationed themselves in nearby buildings, on rooftops, and along the perimeter of the bank to monitor any movements inside. Around the same time, the phone on the desk of Christine Inmark rang. Police wanted to talk to the person who was in charge of the robbery, and Olsson quickly made his demands known. 3 million Swedish kronor, which at the time was around $700,000, in addition to a getaway car and the release of his friend and accomplice, Clark Olofsson, from prison. Olsson's demands were clear. He wanted the release of his friend, Clark Olofsson, a notorious criminal serving time for robbery and murder. Jan Erik Olsson and Clark Olofsson knew each other from previous encounters in prison. Both men had criminal backgrounds and crossed paths within Sweden's prison system. And there, they developed a friendship, and Olofsson told Olsson about his heist and other adventures. Within hours, the police agreed to bring Clark Olofsson to the bank, hoping to calm the situation. But the question is, why would he risk everything to do what the police is asking? Clark Olofsson claimed that the authorities tried to bribe him. They promised him a jail-free card if he shot or stabbed Olsson. To their surprise, when Olofsson arrived, he didn't help resolve the standoff. Instead, he joined Olsson in holding the hostages. Around the same time, more crowds were coming to Norrmalmstorg to see the drama unfold, and more policemen and cars surrounded the scene because for the police, hostages were the most important, or at least it seemed to be the case. The 2 robbers retreated to the vault because the vault provided them with a safe, enclosed area where they could minimize the risk of a police assault and to maintain leverage over the authorities. Inside the vault, the three hostages were tied up by the robbers to make sure they could not escape. From there, Olsson and Olofsson could negotiate with the police on their own terms, while keeping the hostages close by as bargaining chips. The confined space of the vault also reduced the chance of a police sniper or other forceful interventions, which was a significant concern. Realizing that their plans with Olsson to defuse the situation had failed, the police bowed down to the demands of Olsson, including the car, which was a Mustang, in addition to the money. But the authorities withheld the keys of the car. Inside the bank, the arrival of Olofsson frightened the hostages, but after 5 minutes they calmed down a bit, because he untied the three women, also because he had a certain charm to him. You see, Olofsson had a reputation as both a charming outlaw and a notorious troublemaker. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Olofsson was involved in numerous robberies, assaults, and many escapes from custody. When Olsson demanded his presence, Olofsson was already serving a sentence in prison. While Olofsson was surveying the bank, he found a male hostage called Sven Safström hiding in one of the offices of the bank. He was actually the fourth hostage, and he was brought to the vault to join the rest of the hostages. Along with him, Olofsson also brought a phone and connected it inside the vault. He did this so that the hostages could call their families, and this helped them to see Olsson and Olofsson in a different light. Outside the bank, crowds, news channels, and newspaper journalists gathered in Norrmalmstorg to cover the event. They talked to the hostages and the robbers through the phone all day that Friday. Swedish media records have shown that the event, at its height, captured no less than 73% of the viewing public. In fact, news and other TV channels had to interrupt their TV shows without notice just to talk about updates related to the Stockholm Heist. The hostage crisis at Norrmalmstorg Square unexpectedly transformed the area around into a booming center of activity, significantly impacting trade and the hotel industry in particular. Thousands of spectators gathered daily, drawn by curiosity and the suspense of the ongoing events. Far away from the Norrmalmstorg Square, the Prime Minister of Sweden at the time, Olof Palme, was preoccupied with two significant matters. First of all, the elections were approaching, demanding his attention to political strategies and public engagement. Simultaneously, King Gustav Adolf was gravely ill, and Palme was involved in matters concerning the monarchy during this critical period. Using the phone inside the vault, Christine Imark talked to Olof Palme, asking to fulfill the demand of Olofsson and Olsson because she claimed that this was the only way to resolve the situation safely. Imark told the Prime Minister, Olof Palme, in one phone call, "I'm not the least bit afraid of Clark and the other guy. I'm afraid of the police. Do you understand? I trust them completely. You know what I'm afraid of? That the police will do something to us, storm the bank or something." She went on to explain that the captors have treated them kindly, allowing them to move around, providing them with blankets, and keeping them safe. She believed that the police were the real threat. Unfortunately, Palme refused because he claimed this could endanger public safety. So instead of fulfilling the demands of the kidnappers, the Swedish authorities did employ tactics that involved manipulating the environment inside the vault of the bank where the hostages and captors were held. This included alternating the temperature between hot and cold as part of a psychological strategy to wear down Jan Erik Olsson and his accomplice Clark Olofsson, and to make it uncomfortable for everyone inside the vault. After getting frustrated with the police and to counter the efforts of the authorities, Olsson demanded from Säfström to volunteer to get shot in the thigh to show them that he was violent and he was serious about hurting the hostages. But at the end of the day, they didn't go through with it. In one turn of events, till this moment in the story, after 2 days from the start of the heist, Olsson successfully deceived the police because they thought he was Kai Hansen, who was a famous bank robber in Sweden at the time. So they brought his teenage brother in hopes of reasoning with him. Instead, after the brother of Kai Hansen talked on the phone to the robbers, it was clear to the police that they got the wrong guy, cause the brother quickly identified the robber as someone else, not Kai Hansen. During the morning of the third day, police started applying more pressure on the robbers. This time, it was more serious. One policeman snuck into the vault's corridor and closed the door of the vault. But you might say, why couldn't the robbers open the door from the inside? You see, the vault's locking mechanism was designed to be highly secure, ensuring that it could only be opened under specific conditions. When the police locked the door from the outside, they activated its security features, which were standard in bank vaults to prevent unauthorized access. This was a disaster for Olofsson and Olsson, because this was their only way to get to the outside world. But this wasn't even the worst part. This door was the only way to get supplies like food, water, cigarettes, newspapers, and other stuff. It is actually an understatement to say this was devastating for the robbers and the hostages. And to make matters even worse, police shut down the telephone line that Olofsson had attached to the phone inside the vault. This immediately cut down any possibility of communication with the outside world. In hindsight, it is possible that the communication of the robbers and hostages, especially with the media, was embarrassing for the authorities, or maybe it made their job more difficult. To fight the hunger, Olsson took 3 pears that he saved from a previous meal and he gave a portion to everyone. The surprising thing, he got the smallest portion. For the hostages, this was a sign that the robbers cared for them, which made the bond between them even stronger. At the start of the 4th day, a construction crew started drilling holes in the ceiling of the vault through concrete and rebar, which took hours. During these dreadful hours, all kinds of possibilities were running through the minds of Olsson and Olofsson. But one possibility that stood out for them was sending gas through the holes they were drilling. To counter this attack from the authorities, Olsson positioned hostages near the safe deposit boxes with nooses around their necks, because he believed this would put the police at a disadvantage. So he threatened that the hostages would die if they got unconscious after releasing the gas. And to make the scenario even more serious, especially for the hostages, Olsson told them that the gas can cause brain damage just after 15 minutes of exposure. This sent the hostages into panic mode, so they were more willing to help the robbers prevent the gas plan from taking place. To make sure the robbers were not bluffing, police sent down small cameras through the holes to make sure this was actually what was taking place. And they quickly found out that the hostages were actually in a risky situation. During the 5th day, once again, authorities found themselves in a stalemate. So they had to think about the next step that could give them the upper hand in this hostage crisis. Meanwhile, police sent some sandwiches down the holes after a couple of days without food. At this point, this hostage situation was more intense than ever, and everyone was getting impatient, doing nothing. During the start of the 6th day, suddenly, after the hostages were away from their nooses, the police released the gas down the holes, and everyone inside the vault started coughing, choking, walking on their knees and shouting, "We give up." Now, an important question is, why would the authorities release the gas knowing that the hostages may lose their lives? Well, the police were actually waiting for the moment when the hostages took off the nooses from their necks. You see, this was just a matter of time, if you think about it, because the hostages were standing up for hours, and the police knew that eventually they would get tired and remove the nooses from their necks, which was exactly what happened. On the other side of the vault, the police were waiting at the vault's door after the surprise gas attack, and the hostages were ordered to get out first, but they refused because they feared for the lives of the robbers, so they hugged them while they were getting out. Shortly after, Jan Olsson and Clark Olofsson were taken into custody by the Swedish authorities, and each one of them was carried out in a different ambulance and taken to a different hospital for security reasons and to make sure they got the most attention possible. After the dust settled down, Olsson was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and Clark Olofsson was sent back to prison to finish his sentence, in addition to a sentence for not cooperating with the authorities in this hostage crisis, in a total of 6.5 years. While in prison, they were visited by their former hostages, according to some sources. And after several years, both Jan Olsson and Clark Olofsson have been released. Niels Beirut was the one responsible for coining the term Stockholm Syndrome, but professional associations have not accepted it as a psychological diagnosis, but the term went on to have that name regardless of any professional association. This was actually a really interesting and bizarre bank heist and hostage situation, which I hope you guys found interesting. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel because there are tons of videos like this in the works. Thank you very much for watching till the end.